Hey guys, I'm back with photosynthesis part 2. We're going to talk about the Calvin cycle a little bit. Now, when we talk about the Calvin cycle, we need to remember what happened in the light-dependent reaction. It's the photo part of photosynthesis, and we basically did two things. We made ATPs, right? Adenosine triphosphate, which is energy, and we created NADPHs. That's ATP, and this H, NADPH, is going to go to the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reaction. So what can we do now from here? Well, actually, we're going to build stuff. So we've just done the photo part in the light reaction, right? It's the light reaction. And now we're going to do the synthesis part in the Calvin cycle. Now, do you remember what synthesis means? I hope you do. Synthesis means to make. So we're going to make something. All right. Now, so what we want to make is C6H12O6, which is simply glucose. And the way we do this is by using the raw materials of the photosynthetic equation. Now, I don't know if you remember it, but the entire photosynthetic equation was 6CO2 plus 6H2O go to C6H12O6 plus 6O2. We've already used water up in the light reaction, so the only other raw material left is carbon dioxide. We're actually going to take carbon dioxide, some of the NADPHs that we made, and we're going to create glucose in a process called the Calvin cycle. So just a few points. Carbon dioxide by itself has very little energy because it's basically been fully oxidized. You see no hydrogens there. Glucose has a lot of energy, however, so we're going to go from a very low energy compound to a very high energy. So we're going to take these ATPs and that were made in the light reaction, and we're going to store them into this molecule of glucose. So this is an endergonic process. Remember, endergonic means energy is going to go into to get it done. Now, let's talk a little bit about the light reactions. The light reaction, if you remember, took place in the thylakoid. The thylakoid is this region right here. It's these stacks, right? This grana stacks. All right, the thylakoid is here. That's where the light reactions take place. But the Calvin cycle actually takes place in the stroma, the fluid-filled space in the chloroplast. All right, so a little bit different places. Now, we need to produce, we need products of light reaction to drive the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle would not go without the light reaction. So just make sure you know that. So if, let's say we had a big meteor hit the Earth and threw dust up into the atmosphere, the plants on Earth would die because the light reaction wouldn't go, and they would be unable to do the Calvin cycle, which is where they make food. Okay. Now here's the Calvin cycle in a nutshell. The Calvin cycle has 3 steps. You need to write these down and know these. There is carbon fixation, reduction, and regeneration of RUBP. Now, here's the way we need to think about it. In this cycle, it does go around, there's a compound called RUBP, which is ribulose bisphosphate. RUBP is a better thing, but it's 5 carbons. So you have a 5-carbon chain here. Now, let's remember what we're trying to make. We're trying to make a 6-carbon glucose. Right? That's what we're trying to make out of this whole process. Remember C6H12O6? So if we have 5 carbon and add 1, voila, we have our 6. And an enzyme called ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase, which is Rubisco, is the most abundant enzyme in the world. And I know it's an enzyme because of that ASE ending, just a reminder. But we have what's called carbon fixation by this enzyme. It puts this carbon onto this carbon to make a 6-carbon compound. The 6-carbon compound, however, is very unstable. So it doesn't stay 6 carbons for very long. It actually splits into this PGA, this phosphoglycerate. And this PGA then ends up being 2 3-carbon molecules. They're not hooked together. Okay. We add ATP to these molecules, and we actually energize them. All right. We make these super strong 3-carbon molecules, okay? And when we do that, we add some hydrogens to it, and that rearranges a little bit and creates what's called G3Ps. Reduction occurs whenever we add those hydrogens to those energized 3 carbons. and we make glyceraldehyde 3P, which is G3Ps. Now, it takes 2 G3Ps to make 1 glucose. So when we take 2 of these G3Ps and make a glucose, that glucose can then go on to make starch, cellulose, etc. Now, what happens is you take those off, you end up with a 5-carbon compound that is regenerated back into RUEP so it can be used again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a second now, didn't we just have 6 carbons? Yeah, but now if the pathway I showed you actually worked that way, then the process would stop. So think about it. In your equation, you have 6 CO2s. So you got this process going around 6 times. After you go around 6 times, you make that 1 glucose molecule. Okay? All right, so now basically a G3P is the end product of the Calvin cycle. It's an energy-rich carbon sugar. It's the C3 photosynthesis. You'll see the C3 a little later. That'll make sense to you. But this is called C3 because the end product is that 3-carbon compound. It is very important in that G3P makes glucose, which makes carbohydrates. It helps make lipids, which make phospholipids, and helps make amino acids, nucleic acids, etc. All right. Now, tell a little bit about Rubisco. Like I said, it's probably the most important enzyme in the world. It's what allows us to breathe. It's what goes through the process of taking carbon dioxide out of the air, creating glucose, which keeps plants going, which plants make oxygen. So just a little summary of what we've talked about. There's 2 reactions. The light reaction and the Calvin cycle. The light reaction produces ATP, NADPHs. It consumes the water, and it releases oxygen as a byproduct. The Calvin cycle consumes carbon dioxide, which is the other raw material of photosynthesis, produces G3Ps, and it regenerates ADPs and NADPs. All right, so let's look at this. The light reaction, if you look up here, is the water plus light energy makes ATP, NADPH, and an oxygen. Okay, and it happens in the thylakoid. The Calvin cycle is CO2 plus ATP plus NADH. Now look, these 2 came from the light reaction, right? And we're trying to make glucose. Now, it creates ATP because the phosphate's been taken off this P. The ADP goes back to where? The light reaction, right? And the NADP goes back to the light reaction to pick up hydrogen again. So that's a continuous cycle. Okay? So if you look at it in a nutshell, if you think about from the last chapter, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are linked to one another. You can't have one without the other. Ultimate energy comes from the sun, goes through photosynthesis, makes glucose and oxygen. We take that in by cellular respiration. We breathe off carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide in the sun, carbon dioxide, water in the sun, go into photosynthesis, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, basically when we talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, photosynthesis is the most important process on Earth. It's what keeps life going. I put down here, each year photosynthesis captures 121 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's a lot. And it synthesizes 160 billion tons of carbohydrates, food. So, heterotrophs are very dependent on plants for food as a source for unknown fuel, but as raw materials. So just realize that even though we're animals, we also are very reliant on photosynthesis to occur. All right. I hope this helps a little bit, and I hope you have a wonderful day.